today's age, reaching out to journalists, podcasters, bloggers, YouTube channels, social media influencers, it's very important to get your brand out there. PR is not just for the large companies. It can be for anybody with different solutions. With the help of AI, which we'll talk about today, any startup that has any amount of time and a little bit of money can really go a long way towards building press for their business. This is actually a really great way for AI to help. So you actually use different AI tools. You go into those tools and you explain what your business is, share your website, who you are, who your customers are, and you can ask it, like, what are some different story angles or ideas? AI doesn't get tired. So you can come up with 100, 200 ideas until you find one that sticks. If you have a good story to tell, you will get press. You can find your end buyer persona indirectly by going on different podcasts about different topics and then having them tell the people that are going to buy from you.
Today, we are going to talk about public relationships, PR, as a marketing channel for startups. We have an expert for PR with AI, John Mest. PR is not the first thing startups might think about. Could you tell me who could profit from PR?
Yeah, PR is the scary thing where people think that it's a very expensive solution. It requires you to be a Nike or a large company before you can afford to do public relations or do PR. But that's just not true. In today's age, reaching out to journalists, podcasters, bloggers, YouTube channels, social media influencers, it's very important to get your brand out there to these different channels so that your target audience can see and hear about you away from your traditional advertising channels. When you get on a podcast and talk about your brand and business, it sounds much more authentic than, a print ad or an ad somewhere else, or like even searching for something on Google. And so PR is not just for the large companies. It can be for anybody with different solutions. With the help of AI, which we'll talk about today, any startup that has any amount of time and a little bit of money can really go a long way towards building press for their business. And like I said, it does not require tens of thousands of dollars. It requires commitment, some kind of thought, and the use of AI to help be a little more efficient.
How does PR compare to other marketing channels? What are the advantages of PR?
The main advantage of PR is that if you do it well, you can get it for free. And that free press could be way more effective than how much you pay for traditional advertising. So if you are trying to promote your startup, you should have a multi-pronged approach. You should be doing email outreach. You should be doing traditional channels of getting the word out there about your business. But PR is a way that you can kind of tell a story and tell a narrative, and we'll talk more about this. Kind of tell that interesting way of presenting your position, why you built your startup, why your startup is necessary, why it's affecting the industries you play in. And you can tell that to a reporter in a way that really helps them see you as more than just, I'm trying to promote my business, but more as an expert in your field, more as a way to promote your ideas. And that potentially can be free. That should definitely be a way that you should be thinking about promoting your business, because that audience could be really large and more effective than traditional paid channels.
Could you tell some examples from real life how they implemented PR, like small startups, and how they profited from that?
I'll give you a great example. I'll use Just Reach Out as an example for how we do our own PR. When you're a small company, when you reach out to a journalist at a large publication, they might not know who you are, and you're trying to explain to them why they should write a story about your business or about what you're trying to change in the world. And that can be really challenging. If you're a large company that's well known as a household name, it can be a little easier. You can reach out to a journalist, say, I'm so-and-so, I'm from the PR team or the marketing team at this large company, and get them to write your next story or write your next press release. But for the smaller company, you have to think through what are the different angles and story ideas you can tell to the press that'll get them interested in why they want to write about you. And so at Just Reach Out, we do this all the time. And so right now, obviously, we're talking about how AI can help influence PR. In the past, we've done kind of different things around how you can be more effective with writing pitches, translating your story into a narrative for the journalists. And so we've used these kind of ideas and pitched those stories to different publications that maybe write about marketing or write about how startups can succeed, and find ways to think about who your audience is, what that story might be interesting for them, and then presenting them an idea. Along the way, they're going to write that story, reference you, the business owner, reference your company, link to your website, and you're going to build yourself traditional backlinks for like Google, but also just more thought, like brand awareness and thought leadership in your space.
That sounds really amazing. Yeah. I think in marketing, you pay per click. It can be effective, but you are competing against all the other advertisers. It takes a lot of time not to be the gray mess of all those advertisers, especially if you don't do it with a funnel and with retargeting. But with PR, you can reach a target audience when they are relaxed, when they are consuming information, and they associate it positively probably with your brand. You are not distracting them from watching the YouTube video, for example, and YouTube ads, which is not a bad advertising. But yeah, PR can have so many big advantages, but also probably there are some disadvantages. You might not get into the magazine that you aimed and you invested some effort. Let's go step by step how a startup could use this marketing channel. What would be the first step?
When you're thinking about a pay-per-click opportunity you're paying for, you're thinking about an advertising opportunity, email marketing, or whatever you're doing to get more revenue for your business, you always think about your target audience. Who is your overall buyer? So if you're a B2B business, who is the target persona at the business you're selling to? If you are a B2C business, who is the customer? Who is the ultimate person trying to purchase your software? Just like you do that for a targeted email campaign or a targeted advertising campaign, PR is the same way. Who is it that I'm trying to reach? And then instead of thinking about how do I get to them, it's what media do they consume? Do they listen to certain podcasts? Do they read certain blogs? Do they focus on large newspapers or magazines? Do they read trade journals? Do they follow certain influencers on social media? Those are the kind of things you think about first. Who is my target audience and where do they consume their media? And then from there, the second step is now that I have a list of the general media places that I want to reach out to, now it's thinking about why will that person, that podcast host, that blogger, that journalist, why will they write or tell my story? And so that is the second step, which is that narrative building step. But it's not just, hi, Mr. and Mrs. Blogger, you should write my story, talk about my business. And that might work, but it's not going to be the most effective way to do it. It is a blogger that writes about core marketing strategies and how people can succeed in marketing. Tell them a story about how PR is an effective channel for doing that and explain why it's a really low cost way to get really high impact through a viral piece of content on social media. They'll write that story because their audience cares about virality or how to win in marketing. You're giving them a story angle. Of course, they're going to quote you in that story. They'll paint you as a thought leader. Now you've just promoted your business without actually having to write a check for advertising. You're just being able to be seen as a thought leader. You're telling an end customer, potential customer, how they can be doing this more effectively. And by the way, we help you do it really well. Come check out our website and think about it that way. The second step is thinking through that narrative and making sure you target that to the audiences that the media is out to serve. And the third step is then actually going and reaching out to those journalists, those podcasters, those bloggers. And that takes a little bit of time. You have to find contact information for them. You have to write them good messaging. You have to think through what a good pitch would be. That pitch writing step, we'll talk more about that. That's kind of what Just Reach Out can really help with, making you really efficient at that. But that actually is a key way where AI can help a lot as well, getting to that point. And then from there, it's just getting the stories, the pieces printed and out there to your target audience.
Do you create one piece of content or try to distribute it on different channels, different magazines or blogs? Or do you create individuals content for each platform?
So both can be effective. I think there's one angle where you want to tell a story, where you write the piece yourself and you're trying to get a blog or another magazine or trade journal to kind of reprint your story or kind of rewrite your story if they prefer to do it that way. That is an effective channel. We really recommend that. A lot of times it's guest posting where you can tell your story to an audience. You get to pen the article and you get to byline it. And you can kind of pitch that to different publications for, here's a really interesting piece of content you can promote. The other angle is to kind of just start a relationship with the journalist or with the blogger and say, hi, I'm John. I run a PR AI software company. This is what we do really well. These are the different angles and story ideas I think would be interesting to your readers. Would you like to have a conversation about it? That outreach is less targeted with here's my story. It's more so, I'd love to be a resource for you. I'd love to be a source for you. I'd love to help you with your next story. Here are some ideas I thought, but if you have other ideas, please let me know. Can I be helpful? And then have a back and forth conversation. We generally find those to be a little more effective because you're offering the journalist a way to work with you and use you. And frankly, they need to write a story that day. If you have some good ideas, they'll respond back to you and think about what might be most effective. But I think that's definitely another approach as well, which is to start a relationship with the journalist. Make sure that they're interested in your topic. Obviously, make sure you've done your homework and you know that they're interested in what you're trying to tell a story about. And then have a conversation about what would be the most effective way to get that out there.
That makes totally sense, I think. If you give them many more options with what to write about, so he knows his magazine, his blog the best. If you just give him one piece of content, the chances are probably pretty likely that he will not accept that. What would you recommend to startups that are listening now and thinking, okay, my topic is kind of boring, like some kind of marketing service, some kind of coaching, some kind of software solution that is not so spectacular? How should they come up with a great idea that would be interesting for journalists to write about?
So this is not easy. I'd say this is kind of the most challenging part of the entire process, thinking through what would be the most effective and most exciting way to explain your business and promote yourself to an audience. This is actually a really great way for AI to help. So you actually use different AI tools, like we have no preference here, but like a ChatGPT. You go into those tools and you explain what your business is, share your website, who you are, who your customers are, and you can ask it, like, what are some different story angles or ideas that would be interesting to promote myself to a specific trade journal or to a newspaper, to a magazine? And they'll come up with 10, 15 different things. You can then ask, you can give them feedback on how this, are these like interesting? And you can kind of use that as a brainstorming session. There's a great former professor and expert that I follow, Ethan Malik, who actually, he has a great Substack that just posted something last week about the top 15 reasons to use AI and the bottom 5 reasons to use AI. And one of the best ways to use AI is like brainstorming. So if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of people, you might come up with 5, 10, 20 ideas and then get tired. AI doesn't get tired. So you can come up with 100, 200 ideas until you find one that sticks and use that to bounce ideas off the AI to understand what might be an effective story. The best part about it is look at who's written these types of stories in the past. Is this interesting enough to be written about in these blogs? And it'll do that homework for you. It'll save you a ton of time thinking through what those narratives can be. As well as then once you kind of think through like what might be most helpful, then what do you have personally, like yourself, that is different than what everybody else has? It's unique. We always love to say use data if you have it, numbers. If you have certain types of information that nobody else has, that's most effective to help you get that story printed. And it really doesn't have to be the most sexy business to do that. We had a customer, she was a midlife marriage counselor. And so it's really hard when you get your like kind of mid 50s, 60s. That's like her target demo, a very specific demographic, but a very successful business. And she would really had some great insight and detail into that specific time of people's lives. She worked with a lot of military relationships. And unfortunately, she knew that about 70% of military relationships end in divorce. It's a really sad stat, but she has effective strategies to get around that. That's a really interesting topic. It's not the most exciting topic, but when you talk about, hey, there's this really bad stat that is really ruining people's lives, but I have effective strategies to get around it, and here's how I've helped my customers, that's a story people want to tell. And so it really takes some time to think through what that could be. And then using any sort of data or numbers is always helpful to help you kind of get through that.
I really like this example. It shows that even if you think your business is not so exciting, it doesn't need to be exactly about your services you're providing. It can be that you got on working with your clients some interesting facts, or even doing some research about your business. You'll discover some knowledge that could be interesting for average people or some certain people who are consuming this content. Which kind of distribution platforms do exist in PR? Like you mentioned podcasts, for example, and newspapers, magazines.
Yes. So Just Reach Out actually is a great way to find those different places. You have to know who your target audience is and then find out who's writing about those topics. What are the blogs? What are the YouTube channels? What are the newspapers writing about these topics? That's actually what our AI tool is really good at. We've trained our AI model to help you effectively understand who is the best type of journalists and podcasters to reach out to. And all you do is you search your different keywords, search your topics. It could be something as simple as, I'll use the marriage counselor example, like midlife marriage counseling, military marriages, military spouses on small local blogs in the United Kingdom. You can be very specific and it'll go find for you all the journalists that have written about this topic or similar topics in the past few months to few years. And then you can use that to figure out, okay, these are the type of journalists and blogs that focus on these topics. You can easily add them to your media list. I have a simple way of effectively reaching out to them as well. This is where we fine-tune traditional AI models to actually be really effective at helping you build your media list so you can find the 30 to 50 super targeted people that are going to be really effective at helping you write your pieces, rather than just blanket saying, okay, I write about marriage, so here are the top marriage blogs, or here are the top marriage newspapers or trade journals. And so it's really about being specific and using the AI to help you do that.
Yeah, that's opens completely new opportunities. Instead of just searching for whole blogs, magazines, and newspapers that are remotely related to your topic, you can specifically pinpoint certain authors, journalists who have already written about a topic like yours. So the chances of success, the chances of them accepting your offer is much higher. Mm-hmm. What other tips you could give to increase the chances of being accepted?
Absolutely. So the traditional PR strategy, and this is actually the same way that a lot of the traditional agencies still do it, is what I call the spray and pray model. So you download about 5 or 10,000 names off of a list, off of some database. You put them into some constant contact, some marketing tool like that. You send them a very generic press release with a generic email and say, here's my story. Are you interested? And you hit go and you hit send. Now, that is just not going to be the most effective way to get people to respond to you because they've seen a million of those before. They know that it's not personalized. They know that you don't really care about them. You kind of just found them on a list and added them to your distribution. Now, we find it much more effective to actually spend a little time up front to download the 30 to 50 people rather than the 5,000 people that are really targeted, that are really interested in your idea, and then write them personalized messaging to each one. Now, that personalized messaging, again, we always recommend writing it yourself, but we actually do have AI tools throughout our product that help you do that as well. The AI will help you kind of craft messaging based on, again, prompts you give it, based on the information and narrative you're trying to get across. It can then help you kind of craft different emails. And of course, you can edit them. You can change things. AI is not perfect. We don't let our users send anything out that AI generated without being able to review it and proofread it and see things themselves. But that is a really great way to help personalize each note. I read somewhere that the average New York Times journalist gets about 200 pitches per day. And so if you're thinking about how you're going to stand out, sending a generic press release, you're not going to stand out. Like, you need to be sending them a personalized note that really kind of owns in on, I know what you've written before. I know you've written about this topic. But 6 months ago, you wrote a story about this person. I think that I'd be a perfect follow-up to that conversation. Here's the insight I can give that's different than what they gave. You can really be personalized about that topic. Now, again, it'll take a little more time to do that, but actually not much more time than overall would take to just do that large spray and pray campaign. And so that is going to be much more effective. That's why we always recommend to our users, hey, do you have 2-3 hours a week to commit to PR? Even if you don't, I mean, that's like kind of all you need to be super effective to get those media mentions out there.
What is usually your success rate with being accepted, or with some of the clients that you know the statistics of?
So there's two answers to that. One is qualitative and one is quantitative. So I'll give the qualitative answer first. If you have a good story to tell, you will get press. It has worked over and over and over again. If you don't have a good story to tell, you're probably not going to get press. You're probably not going to succeed in your outreach. And so that is why I mentioned in the beginning, that important first step of understanding what the narratives can be, thinking through what the best story angles are, trying some, and if they don't work, just go to the next ones, testing different ideas and messaging until you find a good story that is interesting. If you have a good story to tell, and you'll find a blog, you'll find a newspaper, you'll find kind of a YouTube channel interested in telling your story, and do it that way. So I always say that's the first step is, do you have a good story to tell? We have a lot of great customers that have a good story to tell. We had an amazing customer. She wrote an album, she's a musician. She wrote an album while going through breast cancer treatments. And she actually won a Grammy for that album. It's an amazing story. And so she was pitching that story. She and her team were pitching that story out to the press. They got, I think, 20 or 30 press. It was a very, very successful campaign because it's just an amazing story that people wanted to share and wanted to tell people about. And that's an extreme example. But if you have a good story to tell, you'll get press. Sometimes businesses come to us and they don't listen to our advice. They try to get out there and get features written about their business to large publications, and it's not a good story and they're not going to be successful. So we always recommend, number one, have a good story to tell and tell it well. And then the quantitative answer is, when you do use a strategy like we employ at Just Reach Out, which is to be much more thoughtful about building your media lists correctly, that is going to have the right names and the right people, not huge, just 30, 40 names on it that are really effective for your grouping, and then send them all personalized messaging. Our open rates and response rates are significantly higher than industry averages. Our open rates are about 55%. They're over 50% on average, and our response rates are almost 10%. Some people do much better, some a little worse, but those are our averages from our customers. And again, that if you know the cold outbound media marketing type stats, those are astronomical compared to averages. It's because you're spending a little more time up front to think through that story, build the right list, and send the right messaging. That's how you can be effective in PR. And it's something that we know to be true, and it's true no matter whether you use our tool or not. That is the best way to do PR and get yourself press for your business. Just so happens our tool makes it super efficient to do that. But again, that's the universal truth to getting yourself press.
Which kind of budget on the lower end should a startup plan with to try out PR in general?
You can actually do this for free. You don't have to use any tools or buy anything. Basically, what you want to do is go out there and think through what your narratives are. Again, you can use a free tool like an AI tool to help you do some of that as well, to think through some of those ideas, identify what those potential story angles can be, then go and start Googling, start trying to find who's writing articles about these topics, who's kind of focusing on these stories, and then go and try to hunt down their content information and see if you can find a way to get in touch with them. Now, that is all doable for free. So you don't actually need to spend more than, it's time. There is time involved there, but there's no actual dollar cost needed. But with a tool like ours, our plans start at $147 a month. So it's very inexpensive. So you can start with $100, $200 a month and really be like much more effective because we're going to help you do all those steps really quickly. So you can spend 1 or 2 hours a week doing the exact same thing. That is a way to do it. And again, you can do that with a couple $100 a month and then take some time. You have to think through your angles, your stories. You have to write the pitches, but ultimately that is the lower end of the budget. If you are interested in using an agency, we're not here to say agencies are evil. They serve a purpose. But those, at least in the United States, are starting like just to get in the door price is about $10,000 a month with multiple month retainers. So it just is a lot of money. And so if you're a young startup and you don't have that kind of money and funding, we recommend starting with a tool like ours and going from there.
You mentioned podcasting. Is there something that it's the different approach compared to the written content?
Absolutely. And this is something that we actually really press depending on what your ultimate opportunity is. And so if you are maybe a little bit farther along in your startup, you have a good product, you have some customers, and you're just trying to tell a good story about how a customer was successful using your product. Maybe if a new product launch, it's really exciting, it's going to change a lot of things in the industry. You can pitch that story angle to a journalist and they might include you in a story overall about AI software. They might include you in a story about certain things and help you be an expert or give you a chance to give a couple lines or kind of a couple paragraphs about what you're doing. And that's great. And so that is really an effective way for print journalism. Podcasts are a great long form way to tell your story. So we always recommend if you're a new founder, if you're a new company trying to get off the ground, or even if you're a little more established, but people don't know you that well, the best way, I mean, sure, you could tell your story in a couple paragraphs in a newspaper article, but it's much more effective to get on like a podcast with somebody knowledgeable about in your space, spend 45 minutes to an hour talking through why you built the company, why it's important, why the problem really is and what your customers are seeing, why that's effective, what you're doing is effective to help them change that. That is just much better told in a long form interview. And so we always find if you're trying to do more brand awareness campaigns or kind of just more telling your story, that's much more effectively done when you get to do it yourself in a podcast versus giving somebody else some information and having them write about it in a print story.
Do you have some advice in terms of which kind of podcast to approach? Should you like start with smaller one? And topic wise, industry wise?
When it comes to just getting started, start somewhere. If you don't have a large presence, you haven't done a lot of podcasts or media before, start with smaller podcasts. Get yourself out there, see what you can kind of tell your story, get some repetition in doing and telling your story, making sure it sounds good and it sounds effective like the way you want to tell it. Because it does take some practice to get out there and tell your story. We always say start smaller and then build your way up from there. Most of the larger podcasts expect you to at least know what you're doing, at least have kind of a little bit of media training before you get on their shows. And so being able to show that, hey, I've been on this show before, I've been on this podcast. If you want to get a sense of my style, give it a listen. That really helps you advance. So we always say, get yourself booked on a few smaller podcasts first, and then build your way up from there. When it comes to the types of podcasts, again, it goes back to what we talked about before. What is your end audience? Who's your end buyer persona? And what media are they consuming? So it's interesting. If you are selling IT solutions and you have somebody's podcast, maybe it's a small podcast, only has 500 listeners. Those 500 listeners are buyers of IT departments of major corporations. That's exactly who you want to reach out to. So that's a perfect podcast to go on and tell your story to, because your buyer is the end audience. Maybe you're also trying to get that out there about why what you're doing is important to a business. And so you need the marketing team, sales team, and development team to know more about what you're doing because they can go to their IT team and say, I need this product, I need to get this. So then you might go on a sales effectiveness podcast, a developer's innovation podcast about what you're doing and explain a different story than just why you should buy my software. This is maybe more about a customer case study win, or you've done well with your product from a sales or from a development perspective. Now that developer is listening to a very different podcast than their IT professional. But that developer can then go to their IT department and say, we need this tool because we need to make sure that it's going to help us in this and that way. When it comes to what type of podcast to go on, don't limit yourself to just your industry. I'd say that you probably should start there because it's probably where you feel most comfortable. But you can find your end buyer persona indirectly by going on different podcasts about different topics and then having them tell the people that are going to buy. And so we always say going on podcasts is great and it's a great way to tell your story. But you should be thinking about who's listening to this and why will they care about it and why am I going to get any sales out of it? Because again, podcasts do take time. It takes time to reach out to them. It takes time to record them. And so you want to make sure they're going to help you grow.
Do you recommend to choose podcasts that talked already about your topic in the past, like you mentioned with journalists, or is it a different approach?
It can be both. If you find a podcast in your niche or in your area of expertise, and they have not done an episode about your specific type of industry or type of thing you're doing, that's always a great way to say, Hi, I loved your episode from 3 months ago about this topic. It was new, it was interesting, it was different. Well, I have a similar type of show we can do together where I'm going to tell a story and tell about a topic that's very new and interesting you never told your audience about before. Here's why we should do it. That's very effective. That'll definitely work. You can also do is find a podcast that had an episode maybe a year or two ago about your topic. Our tool makes it really easy to find those episodes and get more information about them. So you can really easily reference that episode in your outreach and say, hi, Mr. and Mrs. Podcast host, I see that you did an episode about this topic. It's been about 18 months since you did that episode. A lot has changed and there's a lot of innovation happening. Would you like to do a follow-up episode? I'd love to come on and talk more about that topic and piggyback off what was already done before. Also very effective. So it can really be both. It changes your messaging, changes how you're promoting and pitching the podcast host, whether it's, I have a great idea, we should talk about it, or I love you did that story about this a year ago. Would you like to do a follow-up episode on it?
How did you feel when you did your first episode, and which kind of advice could you give to beginners?
I think the best advice somebody gave me before I did my first podcast episode was understand generally what you want to talk about, but don't be too scripted. People will be able to know if you're being very scripted and trying to hit your talking points. I don't think it sounds very conversational. It doesn't sound very interesting, and people are just going to turn off the podcast. So know what you want to talk about, know your business. Obviously, kind of if you want to have certain points you want to hit, make sure you hit them. But ultimately, try to make it feel more a conversation. It really goes a long way towards having an effective podcast. My first one, I was a little nervous, but I got through it by being casual and understanding of the situation. It was a business podcast about different trends and innovation. And we just got to have a great conversation about AI and PR, and it was really fun. So I think just a little nervous at first. It's very normal, but just get yourself out there and see if you can have a good conversation.
Which kind of mistakes do you see in PR?
I think the number one mistake we see, because again, we're working with a software program that helps customers do effective PR. And so we hear, people do cancel. And we always ask them, why are you canceling, or why are you not kind of continuing on with our service? It's a month-to-month service, so you can cancel whenever you'd like. Oftentimes people will say, well, I didn't get any press from it. So I want to cancel. That does happen. There's no guarantees in PR. If somebody promises you'll get PR and they promise guaranteed something, they're lying. There's no promises in PR because you're asking people to basically for free write stories about you. It does take time and some iterating to get yourself there. The one mistake people make is not thinking about the author, the journalist, the podcaster, and what their audience will care about. I'll go back and we'll be able to we'll have a little postmortem. We'll talk with the customer that canceled and say, well, what was your pitching strategy? Who were you pitching and what were you saying? And they'd go through and they'd say, well, I was pitching the Wall Street Journal on a feature about my business. And they had just started, they had no customers, they had no revenue. The Wall Street Journal is not going to publish that story. If you had a good idea or a good story idea or angle or reason why the journalist at the Wall Street Journal might be, oh, that's actually pretty interesting. Can we talk more about that? You might have had a chance to maybe get sub-quoted in a larger article about a topic or introduced an article. We had a great customer that got through this because they were having some struggles, but then realized they actually reached out to a couple of their competitors and said, the three of us would like to be included in your article, and we'll talk about why what we're doing is great, because the three of us are better than just myself. And now you have a real story here because you can actually talk to people competing in the industry and have a more interesting conversation like that. For me, the biggest thing that people are missing is just trying to promote themselves and basically try to get advertising for free by doing it through PR. That's not the way to do it. The way to get yourself what we call earned media or free media is to really tell a good story, get the journalist interested in your story, and then get that published. And that's going to be much more effective. The number one thing people do wrong is try to get free advertising by just pitching themselves.
Yeah, you shouldn't be too selfish if you think about free PR.
Yes.
You should think about giving value. If you start as a startup doing PR, of course, you try to get any experience. You don't care about how many followers the podcast has, how many backlinks or SEO strength the website, the blog has. But when you really when you cross this experience phase, do you have some recommendations for which kind of blogs or podcasts not to choose?
There's lots of stats you can use to understand that factor. We have brand new startups that are just trying to get their first piece of media out there. And we have very established companies that are doing really well. I'm thinking of a fintech we work with right now that raised a Series B. They're doing very well in the financial technology, open banking sector. They're getting published all the time using Just Reach Out to do that. But they're not as interested in tiny blogs anymore. You can do things like visitor traffic. You understand Alexa ranks of websites. You can use different types of statistics that are out there. We include some of it in our site, but you can also use free tools out there to figure out what are the bigger places and what are the less big places. At that point, you kind of just know you have aspirations for where you want to be. If you want to be in Finextra or payments or a large fintech blog that has a great following and your entire industry reads, you kind of know what those are. You can use AI tools to help you find those as well. And so you can actually identify either through the chat or through ChatGPT, go in and understand like what are the top blogs based on different like things like authority scores, list readership, traffic, and identify what those are, and then use those to build your media list that way as well. When it comes to podcasts, it's a little harder with podcasts actually because people are a little more protective of their listener data. Obviously, that's the gold standard, especially for larger podcasts with sponsorships. They want to keep that information close to the chest. But there are aggregators that get this information and then help you kind of understand what those are. Listen Notes is our favorite analytics firm for podcasts. We partner with them, and they have a thing called a popularity score, which is where they can kind of understand like sort of like a Nielsen rating for podcasts. So scale 0 to 100. The higher the number, the better. It kind of tells people how popular the podcasts are. They're a great partner of ours. We've been with them since pretty much the beginning. They're really good about helping you understand, oh, this podcast has a score of 24. That's good. That's fine. 55 is much better. So it'll help you understand like which ones are larger and more worth your time.
That's a really great tip. We will add all these links in the description below from the tools and the influencer you mentioned in the beginning, and also, of course, your tool. Is there anything else you would like to say to startups and entrepreneurs related to PR?
Absolutely. I think this is something that's really interesting in the AI front, and it's something that we were really excited about with our team. Just Reach Out is a great tool for understanding who you want to reach out to, building your narrative, creating your narratives, build your media list, craft your messaging, write your pitches, send them all out. We have verified emails on file for every person. If you want to find a journalist anywhere in the world, if we don't have them in our database, don't worry. Our team will go find them, get their contact information for you. You add them to your list. We do all the work, and you get to send your pitches effectively. That is the traditional PR method. That is what the agencies do on your behalf, or you do it yourself through a tool like Just Reach Out or others. And that's the best way to do PR. But sometimes you can be a little more strategic about what are the best places to reach out to. The last 30 years, if you wanted to make sure you ranked well on Google, nobody knows the Google algorithm. Like obviously, that's the most protective thing they have. But there are a lot of SEO agencies and SEO tools out there that can help you increase your ranking, page rank, and be the top result for certain keywords and topics in Google. Now, the same thing applies to these different AI tools. And so right now, if you search on Google, like what are the best PR software tools, you'll see what the best PR software tools are. And if you search in ChatGPT, what are the best PR software tools? Unlike Google, you can actually start asking follow-up questions. You can say, well, maybe not just the best, what are the most cost-effective for startups? Or you can ask different questions and have more of a conversation with the AI about getting to the right answer and figuring out which tool you want to use. Now, these models are changing all the time. These models are brand new. And so it's a great way to not use Google and actually use a tool like this where you can have a back and forth conversation about trying to get to your right answer. If you're a business, you want to make sure that you, just like you rank well on Google, you want to make sure you rank well in the ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Meta rankings as well. They're going to recommend companies. You want to make sure you're on that list. And it doesn't necessarily trend the same as what Google answers are. It can be very different. Our team here at Just Reach Out is going to be launching in the next week, a new tool called ChatRank. So it's chatrank.ai. And that tool will help you understand where you rank inside of these different AI models. You can figure out where you rank today, what you could be ranking better on, what are some keyword affinities, what are some key terms you could be ranking better on, and then give you some successful strategies for how to actually rank better on those terms as well, using a tool like Just Reach Out or others. But here it'll give you much more kind of insight and data into what the AI models think about you today, just like you want to know about how Google thinks about you for SEO. And then obviously sign up, and then we can provide you, like every week, we'll give you updates on where you stand, what's moving, what's changing. As these AI models update and change, like your ranking might change, and we want to be ahead of that. So that's the quantitative way to understand what you should be focusing on for your PR, like what type of keywords you should be trying to rank for. And that's really effective too. And so we're really excited to launch that in the next week or so. Once that's out there, please check it out. We love the feedback because this is a very new space. Nobody's really doing it yet. You can hack it to yourself. We're trying to productize this in a way that makes it super easy for you, the business owner, that maybe doesn't know so much about how the AI models work. Make it really easy for you to understand how you rank, where you rank well, and how you can be improving your rank all the time.
Oh, that sounds amazing. How do you get those information about where you rank in AI?
I can't explain too much.
Yes,
That's obviously
of course,
some of what we're doing here, but it's really about understanding how these AI models work, how they treat different topics. And then we're trying to be very transparent about how our system works, because I think it is really important for you as the user to know, how can I rank better? There's no set and true rules. Just like nobody knows the Google algorithm, nobody knows exactly how these models work. frankly, these models are acting sometimes on their own a little bit as well. We can kind of hack that together and think through what are effective strategies that are working. And then say maybe OpenAI changes their model in a couple months. You're going to need new strategies because they're going to change the way it operates and thinks through different things. And so we're going to try to stay on top of that for you. Ultimately, we're trying to help you understand how these models are treating your brand today and what, based on how they've treated other brands and your industry in general, what are some effective strategies to increase your rank currently in these different models. I think that's really exciting because Google is not going anywhere, but a lot more people, myself included, go to an AI tool rather than necessarily Google. And you're trying to find, have a conversation with a bot really about how you can be most effective for, I don't know, everything from the best vacuum cleaner to the best PR software tool.
Do you have some general advice that startups could do in order to rank better in AI tools?
It's actually similar to what we recommend for all PR things, is that there's just certain types of keywords or things you want to get across that you want to be ranking on. So let's say you are a marketing tool. Most of your successful customers are with you for pay-per-click. That's your bread and butter. That's what you do really well with. Well, if you search through for pay-per-click agencies in Google or in the AI tools, there's a lot of competition there. And so we can tell you what are certain types of niche keywords that you can win on. Maybe you're not going to always win for best pay-per-click agency, but if you know that the best pay-per-click agency for food and beverage companies in Germany, and that you do really well there, you can then rank really well for that specific, very niche keyword. That's what we always recommend when it comes to these AI tools, is identifying, and this is what ChatRank will do, is help you identify what are those key term affinities that are related to what you want to be ranking for. So even if you can't necessarily rank and outspend or outperform the larger players in an industry, you can kind of win on these smaller, more niche keywords that are going to basically, you'll be number one ranked guaranteed. That's great. That means that even if only a couple people a day search that, you'll at least be the number one search for that. And finding and building more of those is really important for you to continue growing your brand.
So it's very similar to SEO, but probably here it makes more sense to go niche, to go long tail, because in Google there are long tail keywords. People are using several keywords, but with ChatGPT and similar tools, it's the next level because you really ask questions and dive deeper. Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
And think about how you use Google. If you wanted to find the most effective pay-per-click agency, you'd search pay-per-click agency and Google, and then just start scrolling and trying to click on a few of the top names, maybe click on a sponsored link and just try to find who's the best. But if you're talking to an AI tool, like a ChatGPT, you'll say, what are the most effective pay-per-click agencies? But then you can really easily follow up and say, well, do any of these focus on the food and beverage industry in Germany? And it'll tell you, rather than Google might be hard, because if you search that in Google, it might still just give you the top names because that's who generally ranks better for everything. They're just the top names are always going to win. But the AI models don't necessarily subscribe to just purely backlinks and authority scores on Google. We're pretty sure that they do include that, but it's not the number one thing like a Google does. If you ask it for specific questions and follow-up questions that dive in, well, now of those agencies in Germany that focus on food and beverage, which are most effective for me with a low budget? You can keep having a conversation, and the AI model will keep refining and figuring out what the right answer will be. And so you can have a much better chance. I think we find that consumers will spend the time to narrow down to a better choice in the AI model versus Google. And so winning on those long tail keywords in the AI world is going to be really effective for you to win in this space.
How do you see the future of Google as a search engine and AI tools in general?
I just don't think Google's going anywhere. They're doing the right things right now by including snippets, short answers, and trying to give you results right away. I still just go to Google and search most things. But I then separately, I will go to a tool like a ChatGPT to search for other things. I'm the kind of user that does both. I don't think the world is going to be a pure AI chat world anytime soon. I think most people will still go to Google. But I think Google understands that they're interested in trying to grab and can keep their consumers with them. As these AI models get better, they're going to start losing people. It's harder to get to a sponsored link now. When they give you a snippet up top with answers, sometimes you don't even scroll down to get the sponsored links. You're not clicking, and Google's not making that money. But they haven't lost me as the consumer because I still go to them to do my searches. So maybe they lost the 25 cents they would have gotten if I clicked on a sponsored link, but they retained me as a user, and that's more important to them than the click. And so it'll be interesting for Google over time to see how they do this, because they were resistant for a long time to include these types of AI answers at the top of the Google search because it does limit some people clicking on sponsored links. But ultimately, we'll see what happens. I'm pretty bullish that Google will maintain for now But as these AI models get better, it's just going to be really hard.
Speaking of sponsored, maybe as the last question, what is your view on sponsored PR, sponsored article, or paying for podcast, being on a podcast?
I think it just be part of your strategy. We don't feel strongly that you shouldn't do it. We want to make sure that you're getting the most for your money. So when it comes to earned media, the only cost really is time. It's about like, are you going to spend the time to win that media, to kind of reach out to the right people to get that story written? At the end of the day, if it doesn't work for you, if you don't get any customers out of it, it did cost your time, but it didn't cost you a lot of money. Whereas these sponsored posts or sponsored articles or podcasts, you just have to make sure that you're getting a return on that. If your cost per customer acquisition is $100 and it costs you $200 to go on a podcast, you should feel pretty confident you're going to get at least 2 to 5 leads that are going to funnel down and be two, I know, like however your funnel works, but maybe 10 leads are going to get you to 2 paid customers. I think it's the same as paying for them through other channels. You're just getting them through that channel. So for us, we always think about it like, how are you going to continue to grow your business? So if a sponsored post in Forbes will get you 100 new customers, maybe that's way worth it for you if that's going to work, but it's expensive. And so if it's not going to work, then you've just paid a lot of money for advertising, basically, that wasn't effective. And so we treat a sponsored PR post sort of like any other advertising. You want to make sure you have a return on that investment.
Yes. Thank you so much, John. It was such a pleasure talking to you and learning so much about PR.
I had a lot of fun today. This is really great.